Dawn came to Firebase Omega-7 like a bloody sunrise, with fires burning across the defensive perimeter and the wreckage of destroyed ships drifting in orbit above. Veltar had not moved from the command bunker in 18 hours, watching in fascination and growing horror as the humans continued their impossible defense. The battle should have been over. By every rule of warfare that Veltar understood, Firebase Omega-7 should have fallen hours ago. The Sekthari had overwhelming numbers, superior firepower, and had successfully breached the outer defenses multiple times. Yet somehow, the humans were still fighting. More disturbing than their survival was the change Veltar could see in the enemy forces. The Sekthari, who had attacked with mechanical precision at the beginning of the battle, were now showing something Veltar had never seen from them before: hesitation. "Status report," Commander Park Hyun requested, his voice still calm despite the smoke and dust covering his uniform. Lieutenant Kim So-ra consulted her tactical display. "Outer perimeter has fallen back to secondary positions. We've lost 40% of our defensive emplacements, but enemy losses are estimated at over 60% of their assault forces." Veltar's crystal body flashed with amazement. The humans had inflicted more damage on the Sekthari in one night than most Confederate battles achieved in weeks of fighting. "How?" he asked Kim So-ra. "Because we don't fight fair," she replied, simply. "Fair fights are for sports. Wars are for winning." The human defensive strategy had evolved throughout the night. Instead of holding fixed positions until they were overwhelmed, human squads moved constantly, appearing where the enemy didn't expect them and disappearing before effective retaliation could be organized. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho's squad had relocated 6 times during the battle, each time leaving behind carefully placed surprises for the Sekthari forces that captured their former positions. Specialist Oh Tae-hyung's delayed explosives had destroyed 3 entire enemy platoons that thought they were occupying secure ground. "The bugs are learning to be afraid of empty buildings," Oh Tae-hyung reported with grim satisfaction. "Every position they take might blow up an hour later. It's making them paranoid." Private Choi Minji had been wounded twice during the night but refused evacuation. She moved with Corporal Yoon Jae-sung's fire team, using her knowledge of the base layout to guide them through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that allowed them to attack the enemy from inside their own lines. "They don't understand our base design," Yoon Jae-sung explained to Veltar during a brief pause in the fighting. "They're used to Confederate bases that have clear defensive lines. We built this place like a maze. Every room can be a fortress. Every corridor can be a trap." The humans had turned Firebase Omega-7 into something that violated every principle of military architecture that Veltar knew. Instead of clear defensive positions, they had created overlapping fields of fire that could support each other from multiple directions. Instead of secure rear areas, they had fighting positions scattered throughout the entire base. Major Han Yu-jin coordinated the heavy weapons with a precision that amazed even Veltar's enhanced senses. Her artillery didn't just suppress enemy attacks, it channeled them into areas where human infantry could deal with them most effectively. "Artillery isn't just about destroying the enemy," she explained while directing fire missions. "It's about making them go where you want them to go. Every shell we fire is a vote in favor of the enemy, moving to a place where we can kill them better." Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok, one of only 2 surviving fighter pilots, had returned to the battle in a damaged ship that should have been grounded for repairs. His fighter was held together with emergency patches and spare parts, but he continued to harass the Sekthari fleet with hit-and-run attacks. "Sir, your ship is barely functional," his wingman reported over the communication system. "It only needs to function long enough to annoy the bugs," Lim Ki-seok replied. "As long as I can fly and shoot, I'm still in this fight." What struck Veltar most powerfully was the human attitude toward their casualties. When Confederate forces lost soldiers, the survivors became more cautious, trying to preserve what remained of their strength. When humans lost soldiers, the survivors became more aggressive, as if each death increased their determination rather than diminishing it. Medic Kang Hee-young had treated over 40 wounded soldiers during the night, working in conditions that should have been impossible. She had performed surgery in bunkers while artillery shells exploded overhead, and had crawled through combat zones to reach wounded soldiers. "Every person I save is someone who can keep fighting," she told Veltar while working on a soldier with severe burns. "But more than that, every person I save is proof that we don't leave our people behind. That's worth more than any weapon." The psychological effect on the Sekthari was becoming obvious. Their attacks, which had begun with overwhelming confidence, were now tentative and poorly coordinated. Unit commanders were hesitating before ordering assaults, and entire formations were pulling back from positions they should have been able to take easily. "They're starting to think," observed Captain Bei Sunwoo, watching enemy movements on the tactical display. "When your enemy starts thinking instead of just fighting, you're winning the real battle." Veltar didn't understand what Bei Sunwoo meant until he watched a Sekthari assault team approach one of the human defensive positions. The enemy soldiers moved slowly, checking every shadow and doorway, clearly expecting ambushes that might or might not be there. "They're afraid," Veltar realized. "Now you're getting it," Commander Park Hyun said. "Fear is contagious. Once it starts spreading through an enemy force, it becomes our best weapon." The Sekthari fleet commander made a decision that confirmed the human strategy was working. Instead of pressing the attack with all available forces, he began pulling units back for reorganization. It was a tactical decision that made sense from a military standpoint, but it also proved that the humans had succeeded in making the enemy think twice about continuing the battle. "They're consolidating," Kim So-ra reported, "pulling back to defensive positions of their own." "Good," Park Hyun replied. "Now they're fighting our kind of battle. When both sides are worried about taking casualties, the side that's better at hurting the enemy wins." The change in the battle's tempo gave the humans time to reposition their own forces and resupply their defensive positions, but instead of using the break to rest, they used it to prepare for the next phase of their strategy. "Phase 2, Park Hyun announced to his officers. "Now we show them what happens when humans go on the offensive." Veltar watched in amazement as the humans began preparations for attacks against enemy positions. This should have been impossible. They were still vastly outnumbered, still fighting from a defensive position, still facing an enemy with superior firepower. But the humans had learned something during the night of defensive fighting. They had learned exactly how the Sekthari reacted to pressure, exactly what tactics made the enemy hesitate, exactly how to exploit the fear they had created. "Sir," Lieutenant Kim So-ra said quietly, "are you sure about this? We've survived the night, but attacking might be pushing our luck." Commander Park Hyun looked at the tactical display showing enemy positions around Firebase Omega-7. "So-ra, what's the first rule of human military doctrine?" "When someone tries to kill you, make sure they regret it," she replied. "And what's the second rule?" "Make sure everyone watching knows what happened to the people who tried to kill you." Park Hyun nodded. The Sekthari fleet came here expecting to destroy a small human outpost without any real resistance. Instead, they've lost more ships and soldiers in one night than they usually lose in months of fighting. Now we're going to teach them what happens when they threaten human territory. Veltar realized that the battle for Firebase Omega-7 was entering a new phase. The humans had survived the impossible, inflicted devastating casualties on a vastly superior force, and created fear in an enemy known for their ruthless confidence. Now they were going to do something even more terrifying. They were going to attack. As the human forces prepared for their counteroffensive, Veltar understood that he was witnessing something that would change galactic warfare forever. The humans weren't just fighting a battle. They were teaching every species in the galaxy a lesson about what happened when you threatened humanity. The lesson was simple. Humans didn't just defend themselves. They made sure their enemies never wanted to fight them again. The Sekthari fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a storm made of metal and death. Veltar watched from the command bunker as hundreds of enemy ships appeared on the tactical display, their insectoid hulls gleaming in the light of the system's star. The largest vessels were the size of small moons, bristling with weapons that could level cities. Commander Park Hyun stood at the main console, studying the enemy formation with the same calm attention he might give to a weather report. "Impressive," he said quietly. "They brought their good ships." The communication system crackled to life with a transmission from the Sekthari fleet commander. The voice was like grinding metal, translated through Confederate language computers. Human vessels, you are vastly outnumbered. Surrender immediately, and you will be permitted to live as prisoners. Park Hyun activated the reply channel. Sectari Commander. This is Commander Park Hyun of the Human Defense Force. You are entering human-protected space. Turn around and leave, or we will be forced to remove you. Veltar's crystal body flashed with disbelief. 8 human ships. Against over 200 enemy vessels, and the human commander was giving ultimatums. The Sectari response came quickly. Your arrogance will cost you dearly, human. We will crush your tiny force and use your base as target practice. Well, Park Hyun said to his officers, we tried to be polite. Open fire when ready. The battle began with Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok leading his 8 fighters in an attack that should have been suicide. Instead of engaging the enemy fleet directly, the human fighters streaked toward the largest Sectari command ship at impossible speed. Veltar watched in amazement as the human pilots flew through enemy fire that should have destroyed them instantly. They moved their small ships like living things, dodging and weaving through weapons fire that lit up space like a deadly fireworks display. How are they not dead? Veltar asked. Lieutenant Kim So-ra, monitoring the fighter squadron's progress, smiled grimly. Because they're not flying where the enemy expects them to fly. Predictable gets you killed. Crazy keeps you alive. The human fighters reached the Sectari command ship and launched their missiles at close range. The explosions were small compared to the massive enemy vessel, but they struck precisely at communication arrays and sensor clusters. Command ship is partially blind, reported the sensor operator. Their coordination is disrupted. Veltar realized this was the humans' real strategy. They weren't trying to destroy the enemy fleet, they were trying to confuse it. Without proper coordination, the Sectari numbers advantage would be reduced. The enemy fleet responded by sending fighter squadrons to chase the human pilots. This should have ended the humans' attack, but instead of running, Lim Ki-seok led his fighters in maneuvers that defied everything Veltar knew about space combat. The human fighters split up, each pilot taking a different path through the enemy formation. Instead of trying to escape, they began hunting the much larger Sectari fighters with tactics that seemed completely insane. One human pilot flew directly at 3 enemy fighters, forcing them to scatter or risk collision. Another used an asteroid as cover to ambush a Sectari squadron. A third pilot flew so close to an enemy capital ship that the ship's own weapons couldn't target him without hitting their own hull. They're not following any known tactical doctrine, Veltar observed. That's the point, Kim So-ra replied. If we fight the way they expect, they know how to beat us. So we fight in ways they can't predict. On the surface of Firebase Omega-7, the first wave of Sectari landing craft approached the defensive perimeters. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho's squad was positioned at the primary access point, hidden in positions that looked empty from above. Wait for it, Lee Dong-ho whispered into his communicator. Let them get close. The enemy landing craft touched down and began disgorging Sectari warriors. The insectoid soldiers were larger than humans, with natural armor and multiple arms. Carrying different weapons, they moved in perfect formation toward what they thought were abandoned defensive positions. Now, Lee Dong-ho ordered. The hidden human positions erupted in gunfire. Private Choi Min-ji's first shot destroyed the lead, Sectari warrior, while Corporal Yoon Jae-sung's heavy weapon tore through their formation. Specialist Oh Tae-hyung's carefully placed explosives turned the landing zone into a maze of craters and debris. But what shocked Veltar was what happened next. Instead of falling back to secondary positions as Confederate doctrine required, the humans advanced. They moved forward into the chaos they had created, using the confusion to get closer to the enemy. Why are they attacking? Veltar asked. They should be retreating to prepared positions. Because retreating gives the enemy time to reorganize, Captain Bae Sun-woo explained while coordinating the defensive fire. We keep them off balance by doing what they don't expect. The Sectari warriors trained to face enemies who fought in predictable patterns found themselves unable to respond effectively to the human tactics. Every time they tried to establish a formation, human soldiers appeared from unexpected directions to disrupt it. Medic Kang Hee-young moved through the battle zone with calm efficiency, treating wounded soldiers and getting them back into the fight. When Veltar expressed concern for her safety, she shook her head. "The safest place for me is where my people need me," she said, while bandaging a soldier's arm. "Besides, the enemy is too busy dealing with our fighters to worry about one medic." Major Han Yujin coordinated the base's heavy weapons to support the infantry fighting on the perimeter. But instead of just providing covering fire, she used the artillery to herd the enemy forces into areas where the human soldiers could deal with them more effectively. "It's like hunting," she explained to Veltar. "You don't just shoot at the prey. You drive them where you want them to go, then shoot them there." The Sekthari fleet commander, frustrated by the chaotic fighting on the ground and the disrupted coordination in space, decided to end the battle quickly. 3 capital ships moved into orbital bombardment position, preparing to destroy Firebase Omega-7 with weapons designed to crack planets. "That's going to be a problem," Commander Park Hyun observed calmly. Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok's voice came over the communication system. "Not for long. All fighters, new target. Let's go knock on their front door." Veltar watched in horror as the 8 remaining human fighters, 2 had been destroyed in the earlier fighting, accelerated directly toward the 3 massive capital ships. It was suicide. The enemy vessels had defensive weapons that could swat the small fighters like insects. But once again, the humans did the unexpected. Instead of attacking from long range, they flew directly at the capital ships' hulls, using their speed and small size to get underneath the enemy's defensive fire. The human fighters attached themselves to the capital ships' hulls like parasites and began cutting through the armor with specialized equipment. It was a tactic so dangerous that no Confederate pilot would ever attempt it, but it worked because the enemy had never seen anything like it. "They're using mining charges," reported the sensor operator. "They're trying to breach the hulls from the outside." The Sekthari ships tried to shake off the human fighters, but they couldn't use their main weapons without damaging themselves. The human pilots held on and continued their work until massive explosions erupted from the capital ships' hulls. "Direct hits on the main power conduits," Kim So-ra announced. "All 3 ships are losing power." The orbital bombardment threat was ended, but Veltar realized that the humans had paid a terrible price. 6 of the 8 fighters had been destroyed in the attack. Only Lim Ki-seok and 1 other pilot had survived. Yet when the wing commander's voice came over the communication system, he sounded almost cheerful. "Capital ships neutralized. Sorry about the mess, but they wouldn't listen to reason." The battle continued for hours, with the Sekthari sending wave after wave of forces against Firebase Omega-7. But something had changed in their attacks. Where before they had pressed forward with mechanical precision, now Veltar could see hesitation in their movements. The enemy forces were beginning to understand that fighting humans was different from fighting other species. Every position they took cost them more than it should have. Every attack met resistance from unexpected directions. Every victory seemed to come with a price that made the next attack harder. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho's squad had been forced to fall back twice, but each time they had made the enemy pay heavily for the ground they gained. Private Choi Min-ji, despite being wounded in the leg, continued to provide covering fire for her teammates. "How long can we keep this up?" she asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "As long as it takes," Lee Dong-ho replied. "The bugs are learning that we don't give up easy. Pretty soon they'll start wondering if this fight is worth it." Veltar began to understand what the humans were doing. They weren't trying to win a traditional military victory. They were teaching the Sekthari that fighting humans meant accepting losses that other enemies never inflicted. Every human position that fell took enemy forces with it. Every human attack, even when it failed, left Sekthari commanders wondering what would happen next. The humans were weaponizing their own unpredictability. As the night wore on, Veltar noticed something that chilled him more than the battle itself. 6 hours after dawn, something unprecedented happened in the history of galactic warfare. The Sekthari fleet, which had arrived with overwhelming confidence to destroy a small human outpost, began to withdraw from the Firebase Omega-7 system. Veltar watched the tactical display in stunned silence as enemy ships pulled back from their positions around the base. They weren't retreating in disorder. That would have been understandable after taking such heavy casualties. They were conducting an organized withdrawal, which meant something far more significant. "They're leaving?" Veltar asked, his crystal body shifting to colors he didn't even recognize. But they still outnumber you. Commander Park Hyun studied the enemy movements with the same calm attention he had shown throughout the battle. Numbers don't matter when the cost becomes too high, he said quietly. They've learned that fighting humans isn't like fighting other species. The human counterattack had lasted only 3 hours, but it had been unlike anything Veltar had ever witnessed. Instead of traditional assaults against enemy positions, the humans had conducted precision strikes designed to maximize psychological impact rather than territorial gain. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho's squad had infiltrated deep into enemy lines using maintenance tunnels and service passages. Their mission wasn't to capture ground but to destroy command posts and communication equipment. Private Choi Min-ji, despite her wounds, had personally eliminated 3 Sekthari officers with shots. That seemed impossible even by human standards. Every leader we remove makes their whole unit less effective, Lee Dong-ho had explained during the planning phase. Bugs follow orders well, but they don't think for themselves. Take away the one giving orders, and the rest don't know what to do. Corporal Yoon Jae-sung's fire team had used Specialist Oh Tae-hyung's custom explosives to destroy enemy supply depots. But they had done it in a way that created maximum fear rather than maximum damage. Instead of destroying everything at once, they had created a series of explosions that seemed random, but were actually carefully timed to make the enemy think human soldiers were everywhere. It's not about how much you destroy, Oh Tae-hyung had said while placing his charges. It's about making them think that nowhere is safe. If they have to worry about every supply box and every ammunition dump, they can't focus on fighting. Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok, flying his patched-together fighter, had conducted attacks that seemed designed to prove that human pilots had no regard for their own safety. He had flown directly through enemy formations, launched missiles at point-blank range, and used his damaged ship as a weapon by ramming it into a Sekthari cruiser's sensor array. Somehow, impossibly, he had survived. His fighter was now completely unflyable, but the psychological effect on the enemy fleet had been devastating. "Sir, why did you ram their sensor array instead of their weapons?" his surviving wingman had asked. "Because blind enemies are scared." "Enemies," Lim Ki-seok had replied. "Scared enemies make mistakes. Mistakes get them killed." Major Han Yu-jin had used the base's artillery in ways that violated every rule of proper fire support. Instead of concentrating fire on enemy positions, she had scattered shells across wide areas, making it impossible for the Sekthari to predict where the next attack would come from. "Random is scarier than accurate," she had explained to Veltar. "When they know where our shells are going to land, they can take cover. When they don't know, they have to assume everywhere is dangerous." But what had truly broken the Sekthari morale was the behavior of the human soldiers themselves. They fought with a combination of tactical skill and apparent disregard for personal safety that made them seem invincible. Every time the enemy thought they had killed or wounded enough humans to break their resistance, more human soldiers appeared from unexpected directions. Medic Kang Hee-young had played a crucial role in this psychological warfare. Instead of staying in safe areas, she had moved through active combat zones, treating wounded soldiers and getting them back into the fight. The sight of humans returning to battle with fresh bandages had a devastating effect on enemy morale. "When the enemy sees our wounded coming back to fight them," she had explained, "they start to wonder if humans can actually be killed. Doubt is a weapon we can use just like any rifle or artillery piece." Captain Bae Sun-woo had coordinated defensive modifications that turned every piece of captured ground into a liability for the enemy. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, and delayed activation weapons made it impossible for the Sekthari to feel secure in any position they had taken. "We're not just fighting for this base," he had told his engineering teams. "We're teaching them that holding human territory is more trouble than it's worth." The final blow to Sekthari confidence had come, when human forces launched simultaneous attacks on 3 different enemy positions at once. It should have been impossible with their limited numbers. But the humans had used holographic projectors, recorded battle sounds, and carefully placed explosives to make it seem like they had far more soldiers than they actually did. "They think, we have reinforcements," Lieutenant Kim Sora had reported during the attacks. Enemy units are reporting human forces attacking from directions where we don't have any soldiers. Good, Commander Park Hyun had replied. Fear makes them see enemies everywhere. Let them fight their own shadows for a while. Now, as Veltar watched the Sekthari fleet withdraw from the system, he understood that the humans had accomplished something far more significant than a military victory. They had fundamentally changed how the enemy thought about fighting humans. VR. Sekthari withdrawal was being conducted with constant vigilance, as if the enemy expected human attacks even during their retreat. Ships that should have been moving in efficient formations were spread out in defensive patterns that slowed their departure, but protected against the kind of unexpected strikes humans had demonstrated throughout the battle. They're afraid of us now, Park Hyun observed, watching the enemy ships disappear into hyperspace. Not just afraid of losing, afraid of what it costs to fight us. Veltar realized that he was witnessing the birth of a legend. Within days, every military commander in the galaxy would hear about the Battle of Firebase Omega-7. They would learn that 8 human ships in one small base had held off a fleet of over 200 Sekthari vessels. More importantly, they would learn that the humans had made the enemy choose to leave rather than continue fighting. Your casualties? Veltar asked quietly. Heavy, Kim So-ra replied without emotion. We lost 60% of our personnel. Both our remaining fighters are destroyed. The base will need complete reconstruction. But you won. We accomplished the mission, Park Hyun corrected. The enemy learned that attacking human territory costs more than they want to pay. Now they'll think twice before trying this again. In the days that followed, Veltar compiled his report for Confederate Command. But as he wrote, he realized that simple military analysis could not capture what he had witnessed. The humans had not just won a battle, they had weaponized their own determination. Other reports began arriving from across the galaxy. Sekthari forces were avoiding sectors where humans were known to operate. Enemy commanders were requesting intelligence about human troop strength before launching attacks. The mere possibility that humans might be present was affecting enemy planning throughout the war zone. This is what we wanted all along, Park Hyun explained to Veltar during one of their final conversations. Not just to win battles, but to make our enemies afraid of starting them. Fear is the most efficient weapon in the universe. It stops fights before they begin. Veltar's final report to Confederate Command contained recommendations that would revolutionize galactic military doctrine. He wrote about the importance of psychological warfare, the value of unpredictable tactics, and the devastating effectiveness of soldiers who refuse to accept defeat. But his most important observation was simpler and more terrifying. Humans didn't fight just to win. They fought to ensure that anyone who threatened them would regret the decision for the rest of their existence. As replacement human forces arrived at Firebase Omega-7, Veltar watched the new soldiers receive briefings from the survivors. They listened to accounts of the battle with the same calm professionalism their predecessors had shown, as if holding off impossible odds was simply part of their job description. Will you fight the same way if the enemy returns? Veltar asked, one of the new arrivals. Probably, the soldier replied with a slight smile. But next time they'll know what they're getting into. That should make it interesting. Veltar understood that standing beside humans in combat had shown him something more profound than courage or tactical skill. It had shown him what fear truly was, not just an emotion, but a weapon that could reshape the psychology of entire civilizations. The humans had not just defended a base. They had taught the galaxy that some species were more dangerous when threatened than when left alone. And that lesson would echo through military planning and strategic thinking for generations to come. As Veltar prepared to leave Firebase Omega-7, he realized that his own people and every other species in the Confederation were about to learn something new about warfare. They were going to learn how to fight like humans. The galaxy would never be the same. The alarm started screaming at 400 hours, 3 weeks after the humans had taken control of Firebase Omega-7. Veltar jerked awake in his quarters, his crystalline body automatically shifting to a defensive amber color. The sound meant only one thing: incoming enemy forces. He rushed to the command center where he found Commander Park Hyun studying a holographic display showing the sensor readings. The human's face was calm, but Veltar could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. "What's the situation?" Veltar asked, activating his recording equipment. "Big trouble," Lieutenant Kim Sora answered from her position at the communications console. "Long-range sensors picked up a HFY war fleet entering our sector. 200 ships, maybe more." Veltar's crystal body flashed bright white with shock. 200 HFY ships was enough to destroy an entire Confederate battle group. Firebase Omega-7 had only 8 human vessels and the base defenses. "Confederate Command is ordering immediate evacuation," Kim Sora continued. "All non-essential personnel are to withdraw to safe positions." Park Hyun looked at the display for another moment, then turned to his communications officer. "Send a message to Confederate Command. Tell them we appreciate their concern, but we're staying." "Sir." Kim Sora's voice carried a note of surprise. "We're not running," Park Hyun said simply. "This is our sector now. We'll hold it." Veltar watched in amazement as the humans began preparations that seemed completely insane. Instead of packing up to leave, they started getting ready to fight a force 25 times larger than their own. Captain Bae Sun-woo was already directing his engineering teams to set up additional defensive positions. "I want every approach to this base covered," he called out to his soldiers. "If something moves toward us, I want to be able to shoot at it." The humans worked with a speed and efficiency that impressed Veltar, but their confidence puzzled him. They acted like they were preparing for a difficult but manageable task, not certain death. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho gathered his squad around a tactical display. "Listen up," he said to his soldiers. "We've got bugs coming, lots of them. But bugs are stupid, and we're not. Stick to your training, watch each other's backs, and we'll send them home crying." Private Choi Min-ji checked her weapon and equipment with careful attention. "Sergeant, what if there are too many of them?" "Then we make sure they remember this fight for a very long time," Lee Dong-ho replied. "Every bug we stop here is one that won't attack someone else later." Corporal Yoon Jae-sung was preparing ammunition for his team's heavy weapon. "Besides," he added with a grin, "think how famous we'll be when word gets out that humans held off an entire HFY fleet." Veltar didn't understand how they could joke at a time like this. In his experience, soldiers facing overwhelming odds became quiet and serious, preparing themselves for honorable death. These humans acted like they were planning a hunting trip. Major Han Yu-jin was coordinating with Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok to plan their defensive strategy. "Your fighters will need to hit their command ships first," she told him. "Take out their coordination, and the rest will be easier to handle." 8. Fighters against 200 ships, Lim Ki-seok mused. "I've had worse odds." "When?" Han Yu-jin asked. "I haven't, but I figure this is as good a time as any to start." Veltar realized that the humans weren't just confident. They were planning to win. Not just survive, but actually defeat a force that should crush them easily. It was either the bravest thing he had ever seen or the most foolish. Specialist Oh Tae-hyung was placing his custom explosives around the base perimeter. Each charge was carefully positioned to create maximum damage to attacking forces while protecting the base itself. "If they want this place," he muttered while working, "they'll have to pay for every meter." Medic Kang Hee-young moved her medical supplies to positions where she could reach wounded soldiers quickly during the battle. "I'm not planning on needing these," she told Veltar as he watched her work. "But it's better to have them ready." "You could evacuate with the Confederate forces," Veltar suggested. "No one would blame you for avoiding this fight." Kang Hee-young looked at him with surprise. "Leave my people? That's not how humans work. We stick together, especially when things get bad." As the day progressed, more sensor readings came in. The HFY fleet was larger than first estimated, over 250 ships including several dreadnoughts. It was the largest attack force the enemy had sent in months. Confederate command sent increasingly urgent messages ordering evacuation. Other allied species were pulling their forces back to safer positions. Only the humans remained at Firebase Omega-7. "Why won't you leave?" Captain Zethmore asked during a final communication from Unity's voice. His purple skin had turned almost black with fear. "This is madness. You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Commander Park Hyun admitted. "But we can make them pay such a high price that they'll think twice before trying this again. Sometimes that's more important than winning." Veltar found this human logic difficult to understand. In Confederate military thinking, the goal was always to preserve forces for future battles. Throwing away lives in hopeless fights served no purpose. But as he watched the humans prepare, Veltar began to see something different in their approach. They weren't planning to die gloriously. They were planning to make the enemy hurt so badly that the Sekthari would never want to fight humans again. Lieutenant Kim So-ra was reviewing the defensive plans with her squad leaders. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy their entire fleet," she told them. "We just need to make them realize that attacking us costs more than they want to pay." "How do we do that?" asked one of the squad leaders. "We make every shot count. Every position costs them ships. Every meter of ground they take expensive enough that they start wondering if it's worth it." The humans had divided their small force into multiple defensive layers. If the enemy broke through one position, they would face another, then another. Each layer was designed to inflict maximum damage before falling back to the next position. Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok briefed his pilots on their mission. "We can't outfight 200 ships in a straight battle," he told them, "but we can hurt their command structure, disrupt their coordination, and make them think we're more dangerous than we actually are." "How do we do that, sir?" asked one of the younger pilots. "By flying like we're completely insane," Lim Ki-seok replied. "Aggressive maneuvers, impossible shots, and attacks from directions they won't expect. Make them think we've got backup. They can't see." Veltar watched the final preparations with growing unease. The humans had turned Firebase Omega-7 into a fortress designed not just to defend, but to punish any attacker. Every weapon was positioned to support others. Every defensive position had multiple escape routes and backup plans. But what disturbed Veltar most was the humans' attitude. They weren't acting like doomed heroes making a last stand. They were acting like professionals preparing for a difficult but routine job. As the enemy fleet drew closer, Commander Park Hyun called his officers together for a final briefing. "In a few hours, we're going to face the biggest Sekthari force anyone has seen," he told them. "They're expecting us to run or surrender. Instead, we're going to teach them something new about fighting humans." "What's that, sir?" asked Captain Bae Sun-woo. "That we don't know how to quit," Park Hyun replied, "and that sometimes not knowing how to quit is the most dangerous weapon of all." The Sekthari fleet appeared on long-range sensors, moving toward Firebase Omega-7 in a formation designed to overwhelm any defense. Veltar counted the ships and felt his crystal body shift to the deep blue color that indicated profound fear. But when he looked at the humans, he saw something that chilled him even more than the approaching enemy. They weren't afraid. They were eager. "Contact in 4 hours," reported the sensor operator. "Good," said Commander Park Hyun. "Send a message to the Sekthari fleet commander. Tell him this sector is under human protection now, and he should turn around and go home." "Sir, they won't listen," Kim So-ra pointed out. Park Hyun smiled, showing those strange white teeth again. "I know, but it's only polite to give them a chance to leave before we have to hurt them." Veltar realized that he was about to witness something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Not just a battle, but a demonstration of what happened when humans decided to fight. Veltar stood at the observation deck of the Confederate starship Unity's voice, watching the small fleet of human vessels approach Firebase Omega-7. His crystalline body caught the light from the nearby star, sending tiny rainbows across the metal walls. As a Keith-Ani, Veltar had evolved from creatures that spent most of their time hiding from predators. This made his people excellent at watching and understanding danger, but not so good at fighting. The Confederate Council had given him a simple job: watch the humans, learn how they fight, write a report. The Council wanted to know if these new allies could actually help in the war against the Sekthari. Most council members thought humans would be useful for building things or growing food, but not much else. Veltar had read the files about Earth and its people. Humans came from a world that seemed designed to kill them. They had survived ice ages, volcanic eruptions, diseases, and countless wars against each other. Their planet had dangerous animals, poisonous plants, and weather that could freeze or burn them to death. Yet somehow, they had not only survived but had reached the stars. The human ships were smaller than Confederate vessels, but they moved with purpose. Veltar watched as the lead ship, marked with strange symbols that spelled Defiant, took position near the firebase. Other ships spread out in a pattern that seemed random but probably wasn't. "They're here," announced Captain Zethmore, the Trilaxian commander of Unity's voice. His blue skin had turned slightly purple, which meant he was nervous. "The humans are requesting permission to land their forces." Veltar activated his recording device. Everything he saw and heard would be sent back to the council. "Grant permission," he said. "I need to observe their methods." The first thing Veltar noticed about the humans was how they moved. When the transport ships landed, soldiers came out in groups. They didn't march in perfect lines like Confederate troops. Instead, they spread out quickly, some watching the sky, others checking the ground, all of them alert. A human in different clothing walked toward the Firebase Command Center. Veltar's translator told him this was Commander Park Hyun, the leader of the human forces. Park Hyun was shorter than most Confederate species, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Commander Park Hyun reporting. "For duty," the human said to Captain Zethmore. His voice was calm but strong. "My forces are ready to take over defense of this sector." Captain Zethmore's skin turned even more purple. "Are you certain? Our intelligence shows this area may become dangerous soon. Perhaps your people would be better suited for support roles." Park Hyun smiled, showing white teeth. Veltar had learned that humans showed their teeth when they were happy, not when they wanted to bite something. This was very strange. "We appreciate your concern, Captain, but humans prefer to handle our own defense. We'll take good care of this place." As the days passed, Veltar watched the humans with growing confusion. They did everything wrong, at least according to Confederate military training. Instead of setting up defenses in the safest spots, they put their guns where they could see the most area, even if it meant more danger. Instead of keeping their command post far from the fighting, they put it right in the middle of everything. Lieutenant Kim So-ra was Park Hyun's second in command. She was smaller than the commander, but moved with the same confident energy. Veltar often saw her checking on the soldiers, not just their equipment but asking how they felt. Confederate officers didn't waste time on such things. "Veltar," she said one day, walking up to his observation post, "would you like to see how we train?" Veltar's crystal body shifted to a brighter blue, which showed interest. "Yes. I must understand your methods." Kim So-ra led him to a training area where human soldiers were practicing. Sergeant Lee Dong-ho was teaching a group of new soldiers how to work together. The exercise looked like chaos. Soldiers ran in different directions, shouted at each other, and seemed to ignore all proper formation rules. "This appears very disorganized," Veltar said carefully. He didn't want to offend, but he had to understand. "It looks that way," Kim So-ra agreed, "but watch more carefully." Veltar focused his enhanced senses on the training. Slowly, he began to see patterns. When one soldier moved, others moved to support them. When someone called out, the others responded instantly. It wasn't chaos. It was like watching a dance where everyone knew the steps without being told. Private Choi Min-ji was practicing with her weapon. She was very young, even by human standards, but she handled her rifle like it was part of her body. When Sergeant Lee Dong-ho called out a target, she turned and fired without hesitation. "Good shot, Min-ji," called Corporal Yoon Jae-sung from across the field. "But you left your left side open." Choi Min-ji nodded and adjusted her position. Veltar noticed that the humans constantly helped each other improve, but not in the formal way Confederate species did it. They seemed to care about each other personally. "Your soldiers show unusual attachment to each other," Veltar observed. Kim So-ra looked at him with surprise. Of course they do. They're family now. We trust each other with our lives every day. This concept of soldiers as family was new to Veltar. In Confederate armies, soldiers worked together efficiently, but they didn't form emotional bonds. Emotions were considered a weakness that could affect judgment. Over the following weeks, Veltar watched the humans modify everything about Firebase Omega-7. Captain Bae Sun-woo, the human engineering officer, redesigned the defensive positions. Instead of the standard Confederate setup, he created multiple layers of protection. He also added escape routes and hidden supply caches. Why so many backup plans? Veltar asked during one of his observation rounds. Because plans fail. Bae Sun-woo replied while checking a new gun position. The enemy gets a vote in how battles go. We prepare for when things go wrong. The humans also brought different equipment than Confederate forces usually used. Specialist Oh Tae-hyung was an expert in explosives, but he didn't just carry standard charges. He had created custom devices for specific situations. When Veltar asked about them, Oh Tae-hyung grinned. Every problem needs the right solution, he said. Sometimes you need a small bang, sometimes a big one. Sometimes you need to make a hole. Sometimes you need to bring down a building. I like to be ready for anything. Major Han Yu-jin was in charge of all the heavy weapons. She spent hours training her crews not just to fire their guns accurately, but to move and set up quickly. Confederate weapons teams focused on precision, but Han Yu-jin's teams practiced speed and flexibility. Fast and good enough beats slow and perfect, she told her soldiers during practice. The enemy won't wait for us to get everything just right. What puzzled Veltar most was how the humans prepared for battle. Instead of the quiet, serious mood he expected, they joked with each other. They shared stories from their homeworld and talked about things they wanted to do after the war. They acted like they were going on a difficult trip, not preparing to fight for their lives. Medic Kang Hee-young was setting up aid stations throughout the base, but instead of putting them in the safest areas, she placed them where wounded soldiers could be reached quickly during fighting. Isn't this dangerous for medical personnel? Veltar asked. Everything about war is dangerous, Kang Hee-young replied while organizing her supplies. But our job is to save lives, not to hide from danger. If someone gets hurt, they need help fast. We can't do that from far away. Wing Commander Lim Ki-seok led the human fighter pilots. His small squadron of 8 ships looked tiny, compared to the hundreds of Confederate fighters usually assigned to bases like Omega-7. But Veltar noticed that the human pilots practiced maneuvers that no Confederate pilot would attempt. They flew their ships like they were extensions of their own bodies. Your pilots take enormous risks, Veltar commented after watching a practice session. Flying is always risky, Lim Ki-seok said. But playing it safe in a fighter just gets you killed slower. We train to be aggressive because aggression wins dogfights. As his observation period continued, Veltar found himself more confused than ever. The humans prepared for war in ways that violated every principle of proper military doctrine. They took unnecessary risks, formed emotional attachments that could cloud their judgment, and seemed to treat the possibility of death as just another problem to solve. Yet something about their confidence was unsettling. They didn't act like soldiers who hoped to win. They acted like soldiers who had no doubt they would win, no matter what the enemy brought against them. Veltar's final report to Confederate command would be due soon, but he realized he still didn't understand these strange creatures from Earth. He could describe what they did, but not why they did it, or whether it would actually work in real combat. That question would be answered sooner than anyone expected.